Happiness is the settling of the soul into its most appropriate spot. Aristotle. The quote, "Happiness is the settling of the soul into its most appropriate spot," is often attributed to Aristotle, though this exact phrasing is not found in his extant works. This sentence encapsulates a concept that is indeed consistent with Aristotelian philosophy, particularly his views on happiness and eudaimonia. Aristotle's concept of eudaimonia, often translated as happiness or flourishing, is central to his ethical writings, particularly in the Nicomachean Ethics. For Aristotle, eudaimonia is achieved through the exercise of virtue and the realization of one's potential. Happiness, in this sense, is not about momentary pleasure or material success, but about fulfilling one's purpose or function, telos, in accordance with reason, which he considered to be the essence of human nature. The metaphor of the soul settling into its most appropriate spot suggests a state of harmony and contentment that comes from living in accordance with one's true nature and virtues. It implies that happiness is deeply connected to personal growth and self-realization, and it is the result of a life well lived, one that aligns with the highest aspects of our humanity. Happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. Aristotle. Aristotle's assertion that happiness is the ultimate purpose of life encapsulates his teleological view of human existence, where all actions aim toward a supreme good, eudaimonia. Eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, is not transient pleasure but a state of being that results from fulfilling one's potential through virtuous activity aligned with reason, the distinctive function of humanity. This philosophical stance positions happiness not as a byproduct but as the central objective of life, guiding moral and practical choices. The insight here is that happiness is an intrinsic goal, shaping and reflecting the quality of life. It is a self-sufficient end, not merely an intermediary to other ends. Aristotle's perspective teaches that the pursuit of happiness requires personal virtue and societal conditions conducive to the flourishing of individuals. Thus, personal fulfillment and the collective good are interdependent, informing ethical and political thought. The lesson is that a meaningful life is an active engagement in the pursuit of excellence, shaped by and for the good of oneself and the community.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more valuable quotes from the legends.
What it lies in our power to do, it lies in our power not to do. Aristotle. Aristotle's statement, "What it lies in our power to do, it lies in our power not to do," reflects his philosophy on potentiality and choice. He emphasizes human agency and the capacity for self-determination. This capacity enables us to perform actions or refrain from them, highlighting the role of volition and moral responsibility. The insight from this statement is the recognition of our control over our actions, which is foundational to ethics. We are accountable for our choices, as they are within our power. Aristotle's thought implies that moral virtue lies in the balance and right exercise of this power, aligning actions with reasoned judgment. The lesson here is twofold. Firstly, that we possess the autonomy to shape our lives through our choices, and secondly, that with this power comes the responsibility to choose wisely, as our actions not only define us but also contribute to our pursuit of eudaimonia, the flourishing life. Happiness is activity. Aristotle. Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, indeed had much to say about happiness, or eudaimonia as it is referred to in his works. The phrase happiness is activity encapsulates a core concept from his ethical philosophy. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle argues that happiness is achieved through the exercise of virtue over the course of a full life. To understand this in context, happiness, eudaimonia for Aristotle, eudaimonia is often translated as happiness, flourishing, or well-being. It represents the highest good for humans and the end to which all our actions ultimately aim. Activity, energy. Aristotle distinguishes between activities done for some external outcome and activities that are ends in themselves. The Greek term energeia can be understood as being at work, an operation, or being active. He believed that the exercise of our rational faculties in accordance with virtue is the highest form of activity. Virtue, arete virtue for Aristotle, is about excellence of character and intellect. He identifies moral virtues, which are about character and habits, and intellectual virtues, which are about the mind and knowledge. Aristotle's assertion that happiness is activity implies that happiness is not a static state, but rather something dynamic that is realized in the doing, in the active exercise of virtue. It is not enough to have the potential for virtue. One must act virtuously, making choices consistent with excellence of character, to truly be happy. Thus, happiness, in the Aristotelian sense, is about being actively engaged in a life of virtue, where the activities one pursues are in themselves fulfilling and contribute to a well-lived life. Happiness depends upon ourselves. Aristotle's assertion that happiness depends upon ourselves underscores the concept of personal responsibility in the pursuit of a good life. He posits that happiness is an internal achievement, not a byproduct of external circumstances. Central to this is the concept of virtue ethics. Happiness is the result of a lifelong practice of virtues such as courage, moderation, and justice. These virtues are not innate but cultivated through choice and habituation. Aristotle's perspective empowers individuals, suggesting that despite externalities, one's character and actions are the true arbiters of happiness. This autonomy in crafting one's ethical life is at the heart of his philosophy. The insight here is that while we may not control external events, our internal responses are ours to shape. The takeaway is a call to active self-development. Happiness is crafted through personal effort and consistently choosing virtuous actions. Misfortune shows those who are not really friends. Aristotle's observation that misfortune shows those who are not really friends reflects his nuanced understanding of friendship and human relations. In his view, friendships based on utility or pleasure are often contingent on circumstances. They may not endure through hardship. True friendship, for Aristotle, is based on mutual appreciation of the other's virtue and character, and it is within this context that his statement resonates most deeply. In adversity, the superficial bonds of convenience or short-term enjoyment are tested and often found wanting. Those who are friends for self-serving reasons may scatter when there is no longer anything to gain. Conversely, adversity can reveal and strengthen genuine friendships, where the foundation is mutual respect and a shared commitment to the good for each other. The insight here is the idea that challenges and difficulties have a clarifying effect on relationships. The conclusion is that misfortune is not only a trial to be endured, but also a crucible that can reveal the true nature of our social bonds. This serves as a lesson in discerning the quality of our relationships and valuing those rooted in genuine concern and shared virtue. Happiness is an expression of the soul in considered actions. Aristotle's conception of happiness as an expression of the soul in considered actions encapsulates his belief that true happiness is intrinsically linked to the expression of virtue through deliberate and rational action. For Aristotle, the soul is the animating principle of life, and it achieves its highest expression when it operates in accordance with reason and virtue. Considered actions are those that are not impulsive, but rather the result of deliberate choice, aligned with a well-reasoned understanding of what is good and virtuous. Happiness, therefore, is not found in passive enjoyment or the mere satisfaction of desires, but in the active and rational pursuit of the good life. This pursuit involves continuous reflection and choice, indicating that happiness is a dynamic process rather than a static state. The underlying insight from Aristotle's view is that happiness is self-determined through the quality of our actions. It is not merely about what happens to us, but about how we choose to live our lives, how we express our innermost character, and how we engage with the world through the lens of virtue. This perspective invites us to focus on developing our character and making choices that reflect our deepest values, suggesting that happiness is not handed to us, but is crafted through our thoughtful engagement with life. Happiness is a state of activity. Aristotle's declaration that happiness is a state of activity positions happiness not as a passive receipt of pleasure, but as an active engagement with life. Central to this is eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing, which transcends momentary joy to encompass a life well lived through virtuous action. Aristotle sees happiness not as an emotional state, but as an expression of virtue in action, excellence in practice. The implication is that happiness is not a static endpoint, but a dynamic process. It is not to be awaited, but actively pursued through ethical and purposeful conduct. From this, we derive that happiness is self-generated and maintained through deliberate actions reflecting one's values and virtues. The lesson is pragmatic. Invest in character development and choose actions that align with virtue. Happiness, then, is not merely felt but done. Happiness belongs to the self-sufficient. Aristotle's assertion that happiness belongs to the self-sufficient stems from his belief that true happiness, eudaimonia, is found through self-realization and the fulfillment of one's own potential, particularly in the exercise of reason and virtue. Self-sufficiency, autarkia, for Aristotle doesn't mean isolation or a lack of need for others. Rather, it implies an internal completeness and contentment with one's own life. This self-sufficiency is characterized by a lack of dependency on external conditions for happiness. While external goods are acknowledged as necessary for a flourishing life, they are not the source of happiness itself. Instead, happiness is achieved through the cultivation of virtues such as wisdom, courage, and temperance, which allow an individual to navigate life's challenges effectively and maintain inner harmony. The insight from this view is that while external circumstances can influence our well-being, they do not define it. Instead, happiness is determined by our internal character and the choices we make in pursuit of virtue. The lesson is that the cultivation of personal virtues and an internally directed life are central to achieving happiness. This perspective encourages personal responsibility for one's own happiness through the development of a virtuous, rational, and self-sufficient character. He who hath many friends hath none. Aristotle's saying, "He who hath many friends hath none," touches on the qualitative distinction he makes among different types of friendships. According to Aristotle, there are three kinds of friendships: those of utility, pleasure, and the good. Friendships of utility and pleasure are based on self-interest and are therefore fleeting. In contrast, friendships based on the good are those in which each person appreciates the other for their character and virtues and wishes good things for the other's own sake. His statement suggests that having a large number of friends likely means most are of utility or pleasure. These relationships are superficial and do not embody the deeper connection of true friendship, which is rare and based on mutual respect and virtue. The capacity for such profound friendship is limited, and thus, a person who spreads themselves across many friendships may actually lack even a single true friend. The insight here is a caution against mistaking breadth of social connections for depth of personal relationships. The lesson is to focus on the quality rather than the quantity of friendships, nurturing those that are based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care. True friendship is characterized by a deep bond that can only be maintained with a few due to the emotional and time investment required. Friendship is essentially a partnership. Aristotle. Aristotle's characterization of friendship as essentially a partnership is rooted in his ethical and political philosophy, where he explores the nature of human relationships and the good life. In his view, friendships are not merely social conveniences, they are profound associations that mirror the reciprocal and cooperative aspects of a well-functioning society. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle outlines three types of friendships: those of utility, pleasure, and the good, virtue. Even though the first two are based on self-interest and may be more transient, all three forms require a degree of mutuality that can be seen as a form of partnership. True friendship, for Aristotle, is most akin to a partnership because it is based on mutual goodwill and a shared commitment to each other's well-being. It involves an equality of giving and receiving, akin to partners in a venture who invest their resources for a common goal. In the highest form of friendship, this venture is the shared pursuit of the good life, where friends help each other to develop virtues and achieve their fullest potential. The insight from Aristotle's analogy is that friendships require ongoing investment, mutual respect, and a common purpose to thrive. The lesson is that we should nurture relationships that are based on mutual growth and well-being, recognizing that such partnerships are central to our own development and happiness. You can never learn anything that you did not already know. Aristotle. The phrase "you can never learn anything that you did not already know" is often associated with a theory of learning called anamnesis, which is most famously linked to Plato rather than Aristotle. However, the misattribution provides an opportunity to explore how Aristotle's actual theories of learning differ from this idea. Plato, in his theory of forms and in dialogues like Meno, suggests that learning is a process of recollection. The soul, being immortal, has knowledge of the forms from before birth, and learning is simply the process of recollecting what's already known. Aristotle, on the other hand, rejected Plato's theory of forms and the notion of innate knowledge. For Aristotle, the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, blank slate, and knowledge is gained through experience and perception. According to Aristotle's theory, we learn by abstracting universal truths from particular experiences through a process of induction and reasoning. The statement attributed to Aristotle is contrary to his empirical approach to knowledge. If Aristotle were to address this sentiment, he might suggest that while we have the potential for knowledge, we must actualize it through experience and education. Learning, for Aristotle, is an active process of engaging with the world, not merely recalling pre-existing knowledge.